Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Israel Matters. First of all, apologies for being late this week. There's a lot going on in Israel, a lot going on in the world. We will be back on schedule this coming Sunday. We'll be releasing again. Once again, I am Rabbi Wolicki, and with me, as always, is my partner in crime, Elliot Chodoff. Elliot, how are you doing?
Doing well. How are you, Pesach?
I'm doing well. As we'll talk about later in the episode, you're up north, and that means you're near some airstrikes that Israel was involved in, and you'll have to tell us about those. We will be dealing with three topics today. We will not be continuing our conversation about Russia's involvement in this region. We will continue it next week or in subsequent weeks when there aren't headlines that are urgent to talk about. But there are three news stories that have emerged just in the last literally day or two that we need to address, and we'll try to get through them all. So the three stories will be, number one, there has been a new tunnel discovered on Israel's southern border, from the Gaza Strip into Israel, a terror tunnel that was just discovered. This was in the news today. At the same time, there was reported just a few hours ago airstrikes in Quneitra, which is just over the Syrian border in the northeastern corner of Israel, sort of. Elliot will explain more about that.
Quneitra area, not in the city itself, but in the area.
In the Quneitra area, and Elliot will we'll have to figure out what that's about, what's going on, why are there suddenly airstrikes in that part of the Israel-Syria border. And also in the news, Saeb Erekat, a very prominent leader in the Palestinian Authority, was diagnosed with coronavirus a while ago and is in critical condition, being treated in an Israeli hospital. So, and these all have serious implications. So let's get to our first topic, the topic of the southern border. I just want to point out one detail in the news story. Just again, I'm just a consumer of the news, and we go to you, Elliot, for a deeper understanding. When I read the news story about the new tunnel discovered leading from the Gaza Strip into Israel, and everyone watching this, I'm sure, is aware of the terror tunnels that over the last few years, Israel's been discovering both there and on the northern border and destroying them. What I noticed is that the news story said that the tunnel is dozens of meters underground. Now, dozens of meters, again, a meter for our American friends, a meter is a little bit bigger than a yard. Dozens of meters underground means that this isn't that some terrorist took a bulldozer and dug a tunnel and crawling through a tunnel. This isn't the Hasmonean tunnels. Dozens of meters means, and I guess you'll tell us what this means in terms of stories of a building, but if you could picture a football field deep into the ground, or maybe even deeper than that, that's how far down we're talking about. These are major public works projects that mean investment of large sums of money, serious technology. They're long, they have ventilation in them. They're very sophisticated tunnels. And that kind of blew my mind about how sophisticated technologically the tunnel is. But talk to us about what happened here and what this means.
So first of all, let's get a sense of depth. If we're talking dozens of meters, we're talking about tens of stories.
Tens of stories.
Right. Figure, a story of a building is about 10 feet. 10, 12 feet, something like that. So 3-4 meters or so. Do the arithmetic. Wow. It's a lot.
Wow.
Okay. So that's first of all. That, as you said, these are not simply done, a few guys with a shovel digging down a little bit and then going under. These are way down deep. And the reason they're going that deep is because we're building a physical barrier on our side of Gaza, at the expense of billions and billions of dollars, that includes a wall that goes down underground, a concrete barrier, to prevent the tunnels from going through. So they're trying to get down below that barrier. And we won't go into the details of the barrier deep enough or not, because in addition to the barrier, there are sensors of all sorts of different types. And of course, our intelligence people are working around the clock, keeping an eye on things. So what was it, 1 or 2 or 3 factors that led to the finding of the tunnel. That hasn't been reported. I can do some speculation, but there's no point. We found it. Certainly the technology allowed us not only to know that it was there, but to find exactly where. And it's been located, it'll be destroyed. It's in the process. And that's one less tunnel. But there are a few things I think here that are important. Go on.
Go ahead. I was just wondering, what do we know a kind of ballpark dollar amount that it costs them to build one of these things?
It's hard to say. Labor is cheap, but we're talking about a concrete reinforced tunnel, wide enough for people to walk in. This is not for those who've seen the movie The Great Escape. This is not, on their bellies.
It's not Hezekiah's
people to
tunnel in
walk,
the old city.
exactly, and to walk in with equipment. It went a length of about 1 kilometer, which is about 1.6 miles.
About 0.6.
I'm sorry, 0.6 miles, a little over half a mile, excuse me. I was backwards. But still quite a length. And it was going to go further if we hadn't stopped it. So it aimed to go for a mile at least. It's expensive. I haven't seen a good numerical estimate, but we're talking about a lot of money.
So is the money that is used here money that whoever gave it for humanitarian purposes and is being redirected, or are the funders actually funding the building of this tunnel knowingly?
So the answer is it depends on who actually is behind it. There are two real possibilities here. One is Hamas, and that's, I think, the usual suspect. It could also be Islamic Jihad, and it might be some sort of a joint operation between Hamas and Islamic Jihad, keeping in mind that even if it is Islamic Jihad, Hamas has to be approving it. There's no way that a project on this scale is happening against Hamas's will.
That's what I was thinking of. And they're in charge down there.
Right. So let's start with responsibility, and I'll come back to the money in a second. Responsibility, Hamas is responsible no matter what. Either actively or passively, ministerially, that doesn't matter. If Hamas, in fact, is behind the project, the money that goes into something like this is coming from a variety of sources, some directly and some indirectly, keeping in mind that money is fungible. So Hamas, as the political administrative power in the Gaza Strip, Hamas as a political organization, Hamas as a social organization, and Hamas is a terrorist organization, it's all the same Hamas. So Iran is giving money certainly happily to the tunnels as well. Qatar is giving money ostensibly for political humanitarian aid, but I don't think they would cry terribly much if some Israelis were killed in the process. The Europeans are giving money for humanitarian purposes, political humanitarian purposes only. But of course, that money being given allows Hamas to free up other money to go into the tunnels. That's the fungible part. So it's an all of the above kind of thing. They're doing very well. And of course, they're skimming off the top because a bunch of kleptocrats like everybody else in this region. I'm overstating that, but many others in this region. Mm-hmm. And you've got to have, some cream to skim off the top for your own mansions and Swiss bank accounts.
Otherwise, why bother?
That's right, exactly. Now, if it's Islamic Jihad, it's also kind of interesting that Hamas is allowing it because it means that they are in the proxy use business, which shows that they are trying to be careful not to be held responsible if there's an attack, because they know what that means from our point of view. This is something
in other words, not wanting their name on something is the kind of display of caution that, in like caring about that, caring about it's just like in social interactions. If you care about your reputation, it means that you actually have something that you're afraid of.
Correct. And the fact is, it doesn't work supremely well against us because we hold them responsible, but it has its effect. There's a big difference, even on the level of if an attack takes place, God forbid, and succeeds, there's a difference between them rejoicing, not rejoicing, and denying.
Mm.
And even if we hold them responsible in all three cases, the level of retaliation would be different. And that matters to them because they don't want to lose stuff that they've invested in and built in and that sort of thing. By the way, I have to tell you, that strategy works much better against Europeans and Americans.
For sure, because they care.
Because Americans and Europeans actually fall into this, well, he was doing it under these auspices and not those auspices, so then it makes a difference, which is why organizations like Fatah back in the day had a dozen spin-offs, and they still do, in part because they can deny responsibility. Fatah, Tanzim, El Aqsa Martyrs, they were all run by Arafat.
Right. Okay, so what's the, just to wrap up this topic, what are we looking to see in terms of the follow-up, in terms of what might come out in the aftermath of this, or what actions might be taken in a retaliatory sense, or what are we looking for now from this story?
Okay, so first of all, we're going to destroy the tunnel. I can't believe that anyone on our side believes that this is the only one. This is the first one that we found in this period. I'm sure there are others. Whether this was the most advanced one, and that's why it was found because it came up against the barrier and its sensors, or for other reasons, there are others. So we're going to be finding more, and we may not be finding all of them, just as I'm not convinced that we found all of them along the Lebanese border. But it's certainly a setback for them. It's another thing, it's important to keep in mind also, we found it 100 meters into Israeli territory because the barrier is 100 meters inside of Israeli territory. We didn't build a barrier right on the edge so that we can operate against the tunnels in our territory.
And this prevents escalation and
exactly, which is our intention.
Accusations of going into their territory, and this way we have some leeway.
Correct.
Right.
And before anyone is thinking, who cares? Ask the people who live in the Gaza area on our side whether they care. They'll tell you, sure. Hamas fired, or somebody fired a rocket last night in retaliation. Iron Dome took it out, and we launched airstrikes just to let them know that we still love them. And that looks like it's the end of the story. Dozens of rockets completely changed the picture for people living on this side. So we have an interest in there not being an escalation.
Yeah, and this is also, this is a reminder of something that you've said many, many times over these last few months, that just because something's not in the headlines, or coronavirus or the American election is taking over the headlines, doesn't mean that our enemies are taking a break. They don't take vacations. No,
they don't take vacation, and they're not taking sick days for corona. They're probably not socially distancing either. All right. Those tunnels are pretty tight.
All right, let's move on to Saeb Erekat, whose official title is Secretary General of the Executive Committee of the PLO. But I didn't even know that was his title, even though he's been a household name for me for the last, 25 years or so. He was the chief negotiator, or one of them, in going all the way back to the beginning of the Oslo peace process with Yasser Arafat. He's been at the center of the power structure there for a long time. So what exactly happened here, and what does it mean?
Okay, so you're right. He has all sorts of titles. He's essentially the number 2 power in the Palestinian Authority, high-ranking Fatah, very high-ranking PLO. He, at the beginning of the month, he came down with corona in his home in Jericho. He's 65 years old. He's a year or so after a lung transplant. And here I want to clarify something, because I've seen all sorts of misinformation on social media. The transplant took place in the United States, not in Israel. He was on the list here, but he went to the States ultimately to get it. So he's high risk for complications. The first period that he was sick, he had very limited symptoms, and then all of a sudden things went south. The PA contacted Israel, and we agreed to take him to one of our hospitals, to Hadassah, which is in Jerusalem, not far from Jericho, and also one of the best hospitals in the world. They agreed, we agreed, and then something very interesting happened only in the Israeli-Palestinian relationship. Can you imagine this? A Magen David Adom, red Magen David ambulance was sent to Jericho with a military escort, an Israeli military escort, because we were afraid that the ambulance wouldn't get there safely because the Palestinians might disrupt the travel of the ambulance because it had a big Magen David on it. And we took him to Hadassah, where he's now on a ventilator and an ECMO, which is a blood oxygenating machine to take some pressure off the ventilation of his lungs, which are obviously not in very good shape. He's post-transplant. He's in extremely critical condition, what's in Hebrew called matzav enosh, which is beyond critical. They say stable, but overall the prognosis doesn't look terribly good.
Yeah, in other words, it's highly likely that some of the people watching this video will be watching it after an announcement that he's passed away. I mean,
it's possible.
It's quite possible.
Look,
so
people do recover, but at this point, the odds are not working in his favor.
Okay, so Elliot, let's just get right down to brass tacks. Here's a guy who is really kind of openly an enemy of the state of Israel. I mean, he advocates boycott and divestment and sanction of Israel. He cheers when Israelis are killed by terrorists and encourages it. He really is one of our fiercest enemies. Why is the right thing to do to help him? I mean, I understand there's an ethical component, there's a political component.
Right.
What's your take?
Okay, so first of all, as far as I'm concerned, this is one of these win-win-win kind of situations, from my perspective. You mentioned that he is their chief negotiator, but he's also very much in the forefront of their propaganda campaign, and he never misses an opportunity to bash Israel in one way or another. Truth is not his forte. As a matter of fact, he's one of those people out there who say, Saeb Erekat is lying when his lips are moving. He's a propagandist and good at what he does. Having said that, let's add a few other aspects to it. The PA has forbidden its people from using Israeli hospitals during the Corona crisis. And all of a sudden, this guy gets sick, and zip, they take him up to an Israeli hospital. That in and of itself is worth a few points.
No
because
commentary necessary. Yeah, I mean, it's
right. I mean, the hypocrisy is beyond belief.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, they were so cognizant of it that when they first took him to the hospital, Fatah announced that he was being taken to the hospital not for corona, but because of complications from his lung transplant. And then you can't keep stuff secret anymore today. So then they came out and they admitted it, and they made some other excuses. So that in and of itself, anytime you can put a hit into your enemy on a level of they've set themselves up for it, and you can just do a good thing and strike at the same time, what's the downside?
Okay, so from a political positioning standpoint, it's a good move to help him. But I see in some of the Israeli media, is actually discussing honestly, ethically, is the right thing to do to help someone who's such a bitter enemy.
Okay, so my perspective on this, first of all, medical ethics are very clear on this. And I think Jewish ethics are pretty clear. He's not a murderer who we're going to return to circulation. Is he going to change his ways? Is he going to suddenly see the light? Don't put a lot of money on that one. But he will find it that much more difficult in open conversation, an honest conversation, to condemn Israel if we do our job correctly and do our information job. And I hate the word hasbara, because every time he says, boycott Israel, we can bring this up.
Right.
Boycott Israel just like I did. And it would always be good to have a picture of him going into Hadassah, and if he makes it coming out of Hadassah, good for you. But I think there's another element to this as well. We have to behave as we are, not as they are. And I hear this, and you and I both speak to Jewish and to Christian audiences, we obviously on different topics. I've often enough in Q&A or in discussion, somebody said, well, why don't we just do to them what they would do to us? And I have a number of different variations of the same answer, and that is that if we become like them, they win. We're not just fighting for our lives, we're fighting for our values, for our ethics. And there's a value of life versus a value of death. And our value is life. And if we have to, we will kill them. But it's only if we have to.
Mm-hmm.
So I think allowing them and their behavior to influence the way we behave is a very, very dangerous place to go. And I've said this again to both Jewish and Christian audiences. Since when do Jews use others as their model for behavior?
I want to respond to what you're saying briefly and then ask a quick question as we wrap up this topic. So first of all,
Okay.
I would say that the ethical component here, that who we are, that we're going to try to save his life, we're going to do our best to save his life, is something that, as a talking point for people watching this video, that if Elliot and I, if we're going to be arming you with the right talking points when you talk about Israel and the Palestinian Authority, this is an important anecdote to remember. And anyone whoever has visited an Israeli hospital would see the greatest example of coexistence between Palestinians and Israelis, between Arabs and Jews, anywhere. I mean, it's the best example. In fact, I believe that the trips of tourists, Christian tours and other tours from outside of Israel, especially the non-Jewish ones, when they come to Israel, one of their visits should actually be to an Israeli hospital, and maybe
Yes.
even meet with some of the medical professionals. So many of the medical professionals are mixed staffs of Arabs and Jews, of Palestinians and Israelis together.
Yes.
Palestinians get treated there all the time. It's very important to remember and to know that this person, Saeb Erekat, who was a bitter enemy of Israel, there's no doubt that the staff in Hadassah Hospital, both Jewish and Arab, are doing everything they can to save his life, just as they would for any other person there. But now let me just end with a question, just to move the topic away from the ethical. Considering his position, is there anything significant politically that we should be looking at should he not recover?
Look, obviously he'll be replaced. And here's one of those, actually, it's a very interesting question that maybe we can delve into at a different time when we have more time for this. But here I'll just say, be careful what you wish for.
That's often the case with these things.
Right. Because you don't know who the next guy is going to be.
Right.
And this is true, by the way. This is one of those calculations in taking out terrorists, because look, you've got a Soleimani type who's clearly a star, and it would be difficult to find someone who would be superior to him. On the other hand, there are many terrorist leaders who they're good at what they do, but if you take them out just because of their position, you don't know who you're going to get next.
Right. I mean, I think a perfect example of that is actually Saeb Erekat's, I guess, nominal boss, which is Mahmoud Abbas. I've often thought that one of the a good situation for people who love Israel is that Abbas is the head of the PA.
Correct.
He's inept. He's inept. He's
Yep.
inept in many, many ways. He's
Correct.
not well respected in any venue, not in his own population and not internationally. He's not a good communicator. He's not even good at being devious. He's very ineffective.
Correct.
And I've often thought like having this inept person there has weakened the Palestinian Authority every day he's in charge. And I've often thought, when Abbas dies, we could end up with someone a lot slicker in that position, and that could hurt us more, which leads to, I guess,
That's right.
I think we've gone on with this topic a little too much. We should probably have a longer conversation. We should come back and revisit the Palestinian Authority leadership. And maybe the passing of Erekat, which might be happening soon, could lead us into that conversation. So, let's move on. I think at this point we should, because we still have to talk about Quneitra. But that's a question maybe I'll leave you with, which is, what does it look like at the top there? Because with Abbas,
there's a lot of competition. Let's put it that way.
All right. So now let's talk about Quneitra. First of all, where's Quneitra, and why on earth, in the middle of everything going on here, was there an airstrike into that part of Syria? I'll just tell you the little bit that I know is that Quneitra is not part of that continuum that goes from the Mediterranean up to the Golan, meaning that stretch on the Lebanese border, Israel's real northern border, that's not where Quneitra is. So this isn't a Hezbollah issue. So what exactly happened there?
No, it's an Iran issue. First of all, Quneitra, the city of Quneitra is right across the line. Anybody who's been up to Mount Bental or any of the observation points looks out on the abandoned city of Quneitra. Now, what happened last night?
Hold on, where is it in relation to the Sea of Galilee, to the Golan Heights? Where is it exactly?
It's some 12 to 15 miles from the Sea of Galilee, and it's right across the line from the Golan Heights. As a matter of fact, the city of Quneitra was in our hands between 1967 and 1974, 75, when we gave it back to the Syrians, and that's a whole story in and of itself.
Okay.
But it's the border runs, the line, it's not really a border, runs just on this side of Quneitra.
Okay.
Now, Quneitra is also a district. So what happened was in the Quneitra district, not in the city itself, the Syrians reported that we blew up a school in a village, which we probably did. But the Syrian human rights organization that monitors these things says it may have been a school building, but it was a warehouse for Iranian military infrastructure.
Wow. Literally right on, so almost on Israel's border.
That's right. Now, we've talked about Iran. Yes. We've talked about Iran and its moves in Syria. And I've said numerous times, I believe that we will not ultimately be able to stop them. We're slowing them down. And what we saw last night is further evidence that they are slowly but surely creeping closer to the Golan. Now we're talking about within shooting distance, at least of heavy weapons. And here we are. Now we're no longer talking about deep in Syria, the other side of Damascus, Aleppo, the Syrian-Iraqi border, which has been, these are all places that have been in the news over the past couple of years. Now we're talking about literally a stone's throw from our line. And I think that should be setting off alarm bells. I'm sure it's setting off alarm bells like here in the military and in the government, but it should be setting off alarm bells for anybody who's watching this and thinking that that nothing is going on. There's stuff going on all the time, not just in terms of our strikes, but keep in mind that every time we strike something, there's a whole bunch of stuff that we're not striking. And there's this perpetual creep closer and closer to our borders. And again, this is just evidence that it's still going on, and they're succeeding. Ultimately, our attacks are successful, but their objectives are not being met.
Wow. Okay. A lot to think about, a lot going on. And as we always say, our enemies do not take vacations. And thank God, the one who guards Israel does not slumber and does not sleep.
He can't afford to.
Yeah. Okay. So thank you for your patience, everyone, for our tardiness this week. We will, as we said, next week, starting up, we'll be right back up and running on Sunday. And keep praying for Israel and keep fighting the good fight. I hope that you gain from this and gain some talking points. And as always, please reach out to us if you'd like some private conversation, if you'd like us to address a group, or if you have any questions or suggestions for future discussions. God bless you and God bless Israel.